The Gunsmoke cast wrapped its final episode in March of 1975. 51 years later, the lights in Dodge City are mostly out. 7 of these 8 people have already died, the most recent loss landing in December of 2025. One actor remains. Number 1 is the man who walked taller than the rest of them put together. James Arness stood 6 feet 7 inches barefoot, and when CBS went looking for a Marshal Matt Dillon in the spring of 1955, John Wayne turned the role down and told the producers to call his friend Jim. They did. Arness held that badge for 20 unbroken years across 635 episodes, the longest dramatic series lead tenure in American television history until 2010. The slight limp some viewers picked up on across the run was not acting. On February 1, 1944, a 20-year-old rifleman with the 7th Infantry Regiment was the first man ordered off a landing craft at Anzio Beachhead because he was the tallest in the boat and could gauge the water. A German machine gun position shattered his right leg before dawn. He spent the rest of that year in evacuation hospitals across Italy, Iowa, and Colorado. The Purple Heart and Bronze Star came home in his suitcase. His leg never fully healed, and he hid the limp from the camera for 2 decades with careful blocking and a long stride. His personal life carried a grief he refused to discuss publicly. Jenny Lee, his daughter, died of a drug overdose in 1975 at age 24, weeks before Gunsmoke went off the air. Virginia, his first wife, followed her by the same cause in 1977. Craig, his adopted son and a National Geographic photographer, died of West Nile complications in 2004. Arness gave almost no interviews about any of it. The second marriage, to Janet Surtees, lasted 33 years and held until his last mourning. Arness died in his sleep of natural causes on June 3, 2011, at his home in Brentwood, California, at age 88. Years earlier, he had written a farewell letter for his website and asked that it run the day he was gone. It thanked his fans and named the projects he loved. Today, he rests in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, in the Sanctuary of Abiding Hope, Crypt 16174. Matt Dillon was the man Dodge City could lean against. James Arness carried a leg full of German machine gun fragments under that badge for 2 decades, and never once let on. Number 2 arrived at the Long Branch Saloon a year after Arness did and stayed 19 seasons. Amanda Blake was born Beverly Louise Neal in Buffalo, New York, in 1929, the only child of a banker. She was working as a telephone operator in Claremont, California, when MGM signed her in the late 1940s and tried to package her as the next Greer Garson. The studio gave up on the comparison and let her go. She was 26 when the Gunsmoke producers cast her as the red-headed saloon proprietress who would become one of the most quietly powerful women on American television. Miss Kitty ran a room full of armed men without ever once asking permission. Her unspoken love for Matt Dillon, never named or consummated on screen, became one of the great unfinished American romances. Blake carried the entire thing in the way she looked at him when he walked through the door. She married 5 times and never had children. Her 4th husband, Frank Gilbert, was the partner of her life. Together on a Phoenix ranch, they ran one of the first programs in the world to breed cheetahs in captivity, raising 7 generations on their land. Her 5th marriage, to Austin City Councilman Mark Edward Spaeth in 1984, ended 10 months later when Spaeth died of AIDS-related pneumonia in 1985. In 1961, she sold her residual rights to Gunsmoke for a flat $100,000, a number she regretted for the rest of her life as the show ran in syndication for the next 6 decades. She walked away from the series after season 19 in 1974, exhausted by the commute from Phoenix and at odds with producer John Mantley over wardrobe and dialogue. After Gunsmoke, the rest of her time went to animals. She co-founded the Performing Animal Welfare Society and helped build the largest no-kill shelter in Arizona. Amanda Blake died at Mercy General Hospital in Sacramento on August 16, 1989, at age 60. Her physician publicly named the cause as AIDS-related complications, contradicting initial family reports of throat cancer. The oral cancer she had survived years earlier had been in remission at the time of her death. Per her instructions, she was cremated, and ABC News wildlife correspondent Roger Ewing carried her ashes to a game preserve in Kenya and scattered them there. A cenotaph carrying her birth name stands at Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham, Alabama, the city where she went to high school. Miss Kitty was the woman who held the room. Amanda Blake spent her last 15 years trying to save wildcats, and she asked to be carried to Africa when it was over. Which detail from Amanda Blake's life landed hardest just now? The cheetahs in Phoenix, the 10-month marriage that ended at a hospital bedside, or the ashes carried to Kenya? Tell me in the comments. The third name on this list barely spoke a line in any given episode, and the audience would still recognize his face anywhere. Glenn Strange stood behind the bar of the Long Branch for 12 years, 6 feet 5 inches tall, mostly polishing the same glass while Miss Kitty ran the floor. He was the wallpaper of Dodge City, and the show could not have survived without him. He was born George Glenn Strange in Weed, New Mexico Territory, in August of 1899, 13 years before New Mexico was even a state, and spent his 20s as a deputy sheriff, a rodeo bronco rider, and a country band fiddler before drifting into Hollywood in the early 1930s as a stuntman in B-westerns. 2 decades of playing outlaws and henchmen in hundreds of films followed, before the call that changed everything came from Universal in 1944. Boris Karloff had walked away from the Frankenstein makeup. Strange replaced him, coached personally by Karloff in after-hours sessions. He played the monster 3 times: House of Frankenstein in 1944, House of Dracula in 1945, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. His face is the one on every Halloween mask of the monster ever sold. In 1969, the New York Times mistakenly ran Karloff's obituary with a photograph of Strange in the makeup. Lung cancer arrived in 1972, and he kept reporting to the Gunsmoke soundstage as long as his strength held. In July of 1973, he attended the funeral of his close friend Lon Chaney Jr. and spoke at the service while seriously ill himself. 2 months later, on September 20, 1973, he died of lung cancer in Los Angeles at age 74. 5 episodes of Gunsmoke that he had already filmed aired after his death. Singer Eddie Dean sang at his funeral. He rests at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. Sam Noonan was the silent man who poured the drinks. Glenn Strange was the actor whose face has scared more children than any other in American film history. If you are finding any of these stories worth your time, hit the subscribe button so the next cast we cover finds you. Number 4 was on the Gunsmoke call sheet for all 604 episodes he could physically reach, missing only 7 across 20 seasons after open-heart surgery in 1971. Milburn Stone was born in Burton, Kansas, a town of fewer than 1,000 people, on July 5, 1904. He grew up watching the actual town doctor, Joseph Wakefield Myers, make house calls in a horse-drawn buggy. Doc Adams, the country physician he would play for 2 decades on television, was a direct portrait of that man. Stone turned down a congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy at 18 to join a traveling repertory company. He worked vaudeville as half of a song and dance act called Stone and Strain, did a turn on Broadway in 1934, and arrived in Hollywood in 1935. The next 20 years went to uncredited bit parts in over 150 films. Stone was 51 years old when CBS finally gave him the role that would define his life. Doc Adams had a sharp tongue, a soft heart, and the conscience of Dodge City. When he snapped at Festus over a glass of beer, the audience understood it as love. Silence from Doc meant somebody was dying. Stone took the role so seriously that he once stormed off the soundstage after arguing with a young producer who wanted to compromise a scene, reportedly yelling, "I am too old to scare and too rich to care." He won the Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in 1968. In 1961, like Amanda Blake, he had sold his residual rights to CBS for $100,000 and regretted it the rest of his life. Stone's first wife Ellen died in 1937. 2 years later, he married Jane Garrison, and that marriage held for 41 years until his last mourning. He had 1 daughter, Shirley, and 4 grandchildren. After Gunsmoke ended in 1975, he retired completely and moved to a ranch in Rancho Santa Fe, where he fished and built furniture for the house. Milburn Stone died of heart failure at Scripps Memorial Hospital in La Jolla on June 12, 1980, at age 75. He rests at El Camino Memorial Park in San Diego. Doc Adams was the country physician who never turned a patient away. Milburn Stone spent 51 years and 150 uncredited bit parts before anyone called his name. Fifth on the call sheet is a name no one expected to find on a Gunsmoke list, and yet he was there for 3 full seasons before he was anyone. Burt Reynolds was 26 years old in 1962 when CBS cast him as Quint Asper, a half-Comanche blacksmith who became the closest thing the show ever ran to a leading man understudy. He stayed until 1965. The Dodge City soundstage is where he learned to be on camera for long stretches without doing anything. He was born in Lansing, Michigan, in February of 1936 and raised in Riviera Beach, Florida, where his father was the town's chief of police. A football scholarship took him to Florida State University, where he was a standout halfback until a car accident and a knee injury ended that career in one summer. Theater work at FSU followed, then New York, then a first studio contract in 1959. After Gunsmoke, he spent the next 7 years in films he would later say embarrassed him. Deliverance rescued him in 1972. Then came The Longest Yard, Smokey and the Bandit, Hooper, and Starting Over. By the late 1970s, Burt Reynolds was the highest-paid actor in Hollywood for 5 consecutive years. The lead in Die Hard, the role of James Bond, and the part of Han Solo in Star Wars all came to him during that stretch, and he turned every one of them down. He admitted in his memoir that the Star Wars decision haunted him. He married Judy Carn in 1963 during his Gunsmoke years and divorced her 2 years later. His long romance with Sally Field through the late 1970s, he later called the great love of his life, one he regretted ending. The marriage to Lonnie Anderson in 1988 produced an adopted son named Quinton and ended in 1993 in one of the ugliest public divorces of the decade. He never married again. His Oscar nomination for Boogie Nights came in 1997. Burt Reynolds died of cardiac arrest at Jupiter Medical Center in Florida on September 6, 2018, at age 82. His cremated remains sat in a family member's possession for 2.5 years, while relatives quarreled over where to put him. He was finally interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in the Garden of Legends section near the lake on February 11, 2021. What would have been his 85th birthday? Quint Asper was the blacksmith of Dodge City. Burt Reynolds became the highest-paid movie star in America 15 years later, and he learned to act standing at that anvil. Number 6 left Gunsmoke voluntarily in 1964 because he was afraid the role was going to swallow him whole. Dennis Weaver had spent 9 years as Chester Good, the limping, slow-talking deputy who hovered behind Matt Dillon with a loyalty that read on screen as devotion. He won the Emmy for Best Supporting Actor in 1959, partly on the strength of a limp he had invented in his audition and was stuck with for the rest of the run. The joke he made about it later was that he should have picked a character who could walk normally because starting a campfire with a stiff leg was nearly impossible. He was born in Joplin, Missouri, in June of 1924, served as a U.S. Navy pilot in the Second World War, and came home to graduate from the University of Oklahoma with a degree in fine arts. The same year he graduated, 1948, he competed in the U.S. Olympic decathlon trials and finished high enough to be one of the alternates for the London Games. Actor's studio training under Lee Strasberg followed, along with a Broadway run opposite Shelley Winters in A Streetcar Named Desire. He was delivering flowers for $60 a week when CBS offered him $300 to play Chester. By his final season in 1964, he was earning $9,000 a week. After Gunsmoke, he starred in 8 more series, anchored McCloud on NBC from 1970 to 1977, and delivered a career-defining performance in Steven Spielberg's first feature, the 1971 television movie Duel. From 1973 to 1975, he served as president of the Screen Actors Guild. He married his childhood sweetheart Jerry Stowell in 1945 and stayed married to her for 61 years until his last morning. They had 3 sons. In 1993, the couple moved into a 10,000-square-foot solar-powered house in Ridgway, Colorado, built from recycled tires and 300,000 aluminum cans, which they called River Sage. Dennis Weaver died at home of cancer complications on February 24, 2006, at age 81. He was cremated, and his ashes were given to his family. A 60-acre wildlife reserve named Dennis Weaver Memorial Park sits along the Uncompahgre River corridor in Ridgeway, dedicated to his memory. Chester Good walked with a limp for 9 seasons. Dennis Weaver was the Olympic decathlon alternate who built his last house out of garbage and made sure the garbage man could not tell where the house ended. Seventh in the order is the actor who played the most enduring deputy in Gunsmoke history and hid every interesting thing about himself behind a nasal mountain accent. Ken Curtis was born Curtis Wayne Gates in Lamar, Colorado, in July of 1916. His father was the sheriff of Bent County, and Ken grew up in the apartment above the town jail, where his mother cooked meals for the prisoners while his father served 2 terms. He attended Colorado College on a pre-med track and dropped out in 1938 to sing. NBC Radio hired him as a tenor, and in 1941 he joined the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra as the band's vocalist, taking the chair Frank Sinatra had recently vacated. Army service in Italy from 1943 to 1945 came next, and he came home with the Bronze Star. Most of the following decade went to singing with the Western vocal group the Sons of the Pioneers. In 1952, he married Barbara Ford, the only daughter of director John Ford. The marriage lasted until 1964 and earned him supporting roles in some of his father-in-law's biggest films, including The Quiet Man, The Searchers, The Wings of Eagles, and The Alamo. Festus Hagen debuted on Gunsmoke in 1962 and joined the regular cast in 1964. Curtis based the character on a real man from his childhood, a fence post cutter named Cedar Jack, who used to end up drunk in his father's jail. The voice was an invention. His actual singing voice was a clear, smooth tenor. The Festus rasp was something he applied to himself every morning for 11 years. He married Tori Connolly in 1966 and stayed married to her for the rest of his life. His last role was the aging rancher Seaborn Tay in the 1991 TNT film Conager, opposite Sam Elliott, with his old Gunsmoke partner Buck Taylor cast as the bad man. Ken Curtis died in his sleep of a heart attack at his home in Fresno, California, on April 28, 1991, at age 74. He had attended a rodeo the night before in apparent good health. Tori, his wife, found him when she woke. The cremation followed quickly, and his ashes were scattered across the Colorado flatlands of his childhood, near Los Animas. A bronze statue of him as Festus stands today at 430 Pulaski Avenue in Clovis, California. Festus Hagen could not read a newspaper. Ken Curtis was the trained tenor who took Frank Sinatra's seat in the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra and married John Ford's only daughter. Number 8 is the only voice in this script still answering the phone. Buck Taylor was 29 years old when he joined Gunsmoke in 1967 as Newly O'Brien, a young gunsmith who arrived in Dodge City and eventually became a deputy marshal. He stayed for the final 8 seasons and 173 episodes. Walter Clarence Taylor III was born in Hollywood in May of 1938, son of the character actor Dub Taylor. 88 is the age he turns days from now. Buck was a competitive gymnast good enough to be sponsored to the 1960 U.S. Olympic trials in Rome by actor Ginn Big Boy Williams. He failed to qualify. Theater study at USC and watercolor training at the Chouinard Art Institute came next, along with 2 years in the U.S. Navy before he turned to acting full-time. Milburn Stone and Ken Curtis, he has said often, took him aside in his first weeks on the Gunsmoke set and gave him the advice that shaped his life. Respect the audience and never refuse a fan a moment of your time. He has lived by it for nearly 60 years. 2 of his sons carry the names of his Gunsmoke co-stars, Matthew for James Arness and Cooper Glenn for Glenn Strange. He delivered the eulogy at James Arness's funeral in June of 2011. Roles in Tombstone, Gettysburg, Cowboys and Aliens, and Hell or High Water followed across the next 4 decades. His recurring turn on Yellowstone as the rancher Emmett Walsh ended in 2022 with one of the most quietly devastating death scenes that series ever wrote. On December 18, 2025, Roger Ewing, the actor who briefly played Deputy Thad Greenwood across 2 seasons before Newly O'Brien arrived to replace him, died in Morro Bay, California, at age 83. Buck Taylor became the last principal cast member of Gunsmoke that morning. He lives on a ranch near Fort Worth, Texas, with his second wife, paints watercolors of the American West, and creates the annual poster for the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo. Newly O'Brien was the youngest face in the Dodge City Marshal's office. Buck Taylor is now the last face left, still painting the country his co-stars rode through, still keeping a promise he made to 2 dying men in 1967. They wrote the streets of Dodge City on a soundstage. Today, the cast itself is scattered from a Glendale mausoleum to a Kenyan game preserve to the Colorado flatlands.